Welcome to another episode of Urban Strategy in the Present Tense, a webinar series powered by the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University. My name is Andrew Zitzer. I'm an associate professor at Drexel's Antoinette Westphal College of Media Arts and Design, where I direct the Urban Strategy graduate program. If you like what you hear today, consider looking into the Urban Strategy graduate program. We have a limited number of $25,000 Lindy Urban Innovation Scholarships still available for the fall 2024 incoming cohort for graduate students. And we'll drop a link into the chat that gives you access to our program and information about the scholarships. This afternoon, we'll be discussing the Kensington Corridor Trust, a neighborhood trust working right here in Philadelphia. I'm excited to speak with two people working directly with the trust, Adriana Abizadeh and Darlene Burton. And I'm also grateful that Lindy Institute fellow Karen Black is joining us to discuss her new report about the project titled Kensington Corridor Trust, the First 4 Years, which is part of the Nowak Metro Finance Lab's City Case series. And we'll drop a link to that in the chat as well. It's very, very worthwhile reading. Established in 2019, the Kensington Corridor Trust is a community-driven development initiative that is governed by a diverse group of community stakeholders, a nonprofit board, and a perpetual purpose trust stewardship committee. Don't worry, no quiz. We'll make sure you know what that is by the end of the hour, which prioritizes neighborhood control and affordability. Today, we'll dive into the history of the Kensington Corridor Trust and take a closer look at its first 4 years. We'll also explore what the future may hold for this initiative that has a lot of potential for its own success and also to serve as a possible model for other communities. Our central question we'll be discussing is whether a neighborhood trust can successfully acquire and redevelop real estate in a disinvested commercial corridor, placing it into long-term community control. The goal to preserve affordability while simultaneously building neighborhood power and wealth. These are goals that really matter to me, those of you who know me and my research. Before we dive into the discussion, I just want to clarify this acronym you'll hear us use throughout the conversation. We'll be referring to the Kensington Corridor Trust with the shorthand KCT, or just the Trust. So whenever we mention those, we're talking about the Kensington Corridor Trust. Now, let me introduce our amazing guests. First, Karen Black, author of the Kensington Corridor Trust, the First 4 Years. Karen Black is a senior research fellow at the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation and CEO of May 8 Consulting, a woman-owned social impact consulting firm. We are also joined by Adriana Abizadeh, who is the executive director of the Kensington Corridor Trust, and Darlene Burton, a longtime Kensington resident and member of the original resident working group, the Trust Stewardship Committee, and the nonprofit board of KCT. So to begin, I'll start the conversation with our guests, then we'll open the floor and reserve the last 10 minutes or so for discussions and questions from the audience. But as we go, for everyone who's participating, please don't hesitate to share your comments and questions in the chat, and I may have the opportunity to fold them in as we discuss. So welcome to our guests, and thank you for making time to join us this afternoon. Okay, to get our bearings and a bigger sense of the project, I want to lead off with Ms. Darlene, who has been connected to this project since 2021. Then I'll turn to Karen Black to get an overview of her sense of the work. And my first question is to you, Ms. Darlene. Let's start with the big picture. The media has covered Kensington extensively, but in a very narrow way. So what don't people know about Kensington? Why is Kensington an important place for community development today?
Good afternoon, everyone. I have lived in Kensington for 28 years. A big thing that a lot of people don't see about Kensington is that under the unhoused population is actually is a thriving community. We come together, we help each other, we try to activate spaces and have a sense of community here, even though we face such challenges as having such a big unhoused addiction population in our midst. We are a very strong community. We care for one another, we uplift each other, and there is a lot of positivity here in Kensington.
So given that we have a fuller picture of Kensington as a place of both strengths and challenges, where does the Kensington Corridor Trust fit in terms of why it matters for Kensington and what makes it kind of an important project?
I believe it's important because it gives voice to the community. Kensington Corridor Trust is a organization that doesn't just give us what they think we need. They actually listen to the voices of the community and what we would like to see in our commercial corridor, what is needed, and frankly, what is wanted by us, the community who live here every day.
And we're going to get into the mechanics of how all of that works and the structure that you all have created to support that. But my last sort of initial question for you, Ms. Darlene, is when you first heard about the Kensington Corridor Trust as it was kind of in formation, what were your initial thoughts and reactions as someone who had lived in Kensington for a long time? Because this is kind of a new model. So what was your sort of initial read, and how has that maybe evolved as you've gotten more involved?
So my initial thoughts was I know nothing about real estate and how it works. And I'm asked to be a part of this now community. What's changed about it is Adriana, I see her leadership, I see her passion for what she's doing, and it really makes you want to be a part of it. You know, I've seen her advocate for KCT and advocate for this community and let investors know that this community is worth investing in. And I've seen the fruits of that labor.
Yeah, what strikes me about that, Mr. Darlene, is that, this is about people and relationships as much as it's about real estate and community development. And we've spoken before in our calls to prepare for this, and I've read the case. And it just seems to me that we need to kind of highlight that it's the people and the relationships and the trust that really kind of empower this important experiment in reversing the trends of decline and the threat of gentrification and all of the things that are affecting Kensington, that without relationships built on trust over time, this kind of thing wouldn't work. That's my opinion.
Absolutely. I agree with you. It does work hand in hand with the community. As I said, Adriana does give a voice to us, and involving us in that process. And it is a way to kind of fight off gentrification, which we know in neighborhoods is not a good thing. You know, it can price out the people that's been longtime residents here and that has been through the worst and now are unable to stay because of prices and taxes going up in the community. So I really do appreciate what Adriana's doing on multi levels.
Thank you for that, Ms. Darlene. And I know that appreciation goes both ways, and that your work is pivotal to the success of this initiative. But I want to turn to Karen for a moment to first ask you, Karen, how did it come about that you were able to sort of travel with the KCT over the last 4 years and study their work? And sort of secondly, can you give us a sense of the main issues that are at stake for KCT that came up for you when you were writing the Nowak lab report?
Sure. So I was asked to attend a meeting with a whole bunch of other policy people who've been working in neighborhoods. And the premise was that the way investment is happening in low-income neighborhoods of color is really harmful for residents, just like Ms. Darlene said. So is there another way to do it? And the eventual founders of the KCT, it didn't exist yet, wanted to come up with some mechanism. They didn't think one existed, right? That could do this, that would give the community control of the real estate assets rather than investors, and make sure that it's long-term residents that benefit. And so we sat there, we threw ideas against the wall, and the minute I left, I said, this would be a great case study. Like, we need to learn about this. Everybody's talking about community control, but no one's really doing it. So we need to learn from each other. And the Nowak Metro Lab has city cases. I've produced others, but we tend to look back historically. So we know this worked. Let's go back 20 years and see how it all happened. And so I went back to my colleagues at Drexel and I said, no, we want to embed ourselves now. We want to learn this in real time and share it with folks in real time. And so that's what I've been able to do with Adriana and her board. And it's been phenomenally interesting. One thing that's of note is the title of this is the first 4 years. And we actually are going to follow this for another 3 years. So kind of stay tuned. But we felt that the lessons learned were just so powerful, we didn't want to wait too long. We wanted to share it with everyone else. As to why this is important and what these issues are, land control is power. And investors are now moving into low-income neighborhoods of color where property values have been depressed artificially for years, and disinvestment has been the investment approach. And 20% of properties bought in these neighborhoods were bought by investors, and most of them are extracting that profit and bringing it back home to them and leaving the community with very little. And we talk about neighborhood retail because that's the target area. It is a deteriorated historic commercial corridor along a transit line. But when we look at neighborhood retail nationally, 81% of neighborhood retail properties are owned by households who are in the top 1% income brackets, right? So it's not that neighbors are owning these for neighbors. Right. And so this whole idea of not only giving the community the power, but over a long term, having goals of seeding entrepreneurs in the neighborhood, of providing residents affordably in the neighborhood was incredibly intriguing. It still is, right? They're going step by step, and being able to follow it was an honor.
I love that, Karen. As a researcher, I think too often we fly in and fly out of community, and we sort of do an extractive thing of our own, right? We sort of like publish our results and we move on, and we get, accolades or tenure or contracts or whatever. And then the community, the needle hasn't moved in the neighborhood. And we progress sort of in our profession, but that doesn't sort of give anything of value back. And so I think this long-term engagement that you're having with this community, and I imagine the sort of support that reflective sort of practice has, will allow for a mutually beneficial exchange of ideas, and a documentation of this model that doesn't just take from the community, but not only gives back to this project, but also can help other communities be inspired by the lessons learned.
That's the hope.
That is the hope. And so now we have to reveal what this KCT thing is, because we've been talking about it for 10 minutes. So I want to turn to Adriana, Executive Director of KCT, to just tell us a little bit about what the trust is, and the kinds of businesses and tenants that you're attracting to the corridor, and just like, what are we talking about with this new model of commercial corridor revitalization that is really led by community power?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, the neighborhood trust model is one that is really picking up on the learnings of decades worth of work from other models, right? So we looked at best practices and outcomes, thinking about community land trusts, thinking about community development corporations, business improvement districts, traditional private development, right? And we said, what are the pieces of this that we feel the neighborhood could hold on to in a way that would create true transformation from inside of the neighborhood, rather than allowing or creating space for outsiders to set the agenda, right? And we heard from Ms. Darlene, it's not about being told what is a good idea or being told what should be done. It is really about collective decision making and asking folks, what do you want to see on the corridor? What assets do you want to collectively own? How do you want us to steward this space in collective for all of you? And so what the neighborhood trust model has done, once we took some of those learnings, is we went to a lot of folks who have expertise in thinking about ways to combine different types of models and infrastructures to provide a perpetual protection for the real estate. So we are a 501c3 traditional nonprofit structure that is coupled with and tethered to legally and financially a perpetual purpose trust, which is a very specific type of trust structure that allows you to perpetually protect the assets that are inside of it for a purpose. And our purpose, as designed by the neighborhood, is twofold. The first is preserving intergenerational affordability in the midst of a neighborhood that's actively experiencing gentrification and displacement. And the second is ensuring localized and collective ownership of real estate. And what the model really hopes to do is not only just to preserve affordability and to ensure that there's access to affordable residential spaces and commercial spaces for small business owners, but it's also really hoping to say, we can own things in collective and we can steward them in collective in a way that benefits more than just a handful of folks, right? Not just the 1%ers, but the folks who are in this neighborhood who are predominantly low and moderate income folks, right? And so the types of tenants that we've attracted to the corridor, particularly on the commercial footprint, have really reflected that, right? So they're predominantly low, moderate income, Black and brown folks who grew up in this neighborhood or currently live in this neighborhood, who are interested in seeing the corridor come back to what it once was. And I think the beauty of the neighborhood trust model and localized neighborhood governance is that we get folks like Miss Darlene, who have been in the neighborhood for close to 30 years, next to folks who have been in the neighborhood for 5 or 10 years, to be able to build a vision that is collective towards a future that everybody wants. And so it gives us this breadth and space to pull in history of what we know is possible, along with this unspoken history of like what could be possible. And so it's been just a really beautiful opportunity, both an honor and a privilege on my part to lead this work, but a beautiful opportunity to be in partnership with the folks who are on the ground in this neighborhood, who are doing the hard work, right? Outside of KCT. This is not a silver bullet. This is not a solution for all things. This is a niche, and the niche is community wealth building and collective ownership of real estate and preservation of affordability. But it really is part of a much larger ecosystem that exists here in the neighborhood.
Can you talk a little bit about the number of properties that are part of the neighborhood trust at this point, the geography of where it exists in Philadelphia and in Kensington, and maybe some of the tenants who you're bringing online to reflect that diversity of neighborhood interests?
Absolutely. So we are currently stewarding 23 properties. So we close on about 5 per year, our most recent acquisition being just last week. And these properties range from straight commercial to commercial mixed use. We also engage in conservation work. So we also steward an 11-lot pollinator garden on the 3200 block of Kensington Ave that is a very active third space in the neighborhood, activated by residents, small business owners, and many of our nonprofit partners here. Our corridor boundaries are from Lehigh Avenue to Glenwood Avenue. And our primary target area for acquisition currently is between Allegheny and Tioga. So if you were riding the L, it's literally the K&A stop to the Kensington and Tioga stop. Within those 3 blocks is where all of our acquisition sets have currently taken place. And it's been very intentionally through a density strategy to make sure that our acquisitions are feeding and supporting each other, right? As we bring on businesses online, we want them to have proximity to other businesses that are coming online. The first business that we attracted to the corridor is a brown woman-owned candle making studio. So this woman grew up in the neighborhood, single mother, working really hard to lift up her business structure, was already located in the Kensington neighborhood, but did not have a corridor-facing business. And so she was losing the kind of street side, right, benefit that you get in being proximity to the train stations and to where the traditional walking transit is. And since moving to the corridor, she's seen sales increase significantly, getting larger groups of folks coming into the business. And so it's been really, really successful for her. Our most recent business attracted to the corridor is a grocery store. And that grocery store will be operated by a gentleman who grew up in this neighborhood and was already doing business in the neighborhood in and around food, and approached us about doing a commercial shared kitchen. And we said, well, we'd love to work with you on a commercial shared kitchen. And we have a building that might work in, but we already kind of had it slated for a grocery store. And he's like, well, great, I can do both. And so these are the types of folks who see that there's value in investing in home, right? Like this is where they grew up. They want to see these spaces come back to what they know and remember. But then again, right, it is forward facing. This is a food desert. And so bringing that food accessibility that's culturally competent, that's affordable and in line with what folks have been asking for, asking not just of the trust, but asking of the city, asking of each other, right? And that grocery store, I think, is such a critical juncture in KCT's history. And we're really, really excited to support that business owner and bringing that to the corridor and stewarding that space, and for the neighborhood to own the building that it's inside of, right? And benefit from the work that's being done there.
So so many questions, so many things about how to operationalize this model and make it equitable and inclusive and participatory. But before we do that, I just want to throw up a map that you sent me, Adriana, that will give us a little bit of perspective about where we are and in the city and in the property. So this I just want to leave this up for a minute if everyone can see it. This is the blocks that you're currently doing work on with the stewarded properties as of probably a few weeks ago. And these are some examples of the vibrancy that these businesses bring to the corridor.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. And so you'll see at the top right, that's Crystal, the owner of Waxery. So that's the candle making studio that I mentioned. That was the first business that we attracted to the corridor. And in the bottom right, and you'll see kind of if you follow the arrow over to the left to the green circled properties, that's the 11-lot pollinator garden that we steward. That is a very active third space. And that mural that you see there was co-designed with a Kensington resident who is now one of our newer businesses that we've attracted to the corridor. And he recently opened a art gallery and studio on the 3300 block of Kensington Ave. But he co-created and co-designed that mural in partnership with neighbors. And the little beautiful babies that you see in the front of the mural are the ones represented in the actual mural itself behind them.
All right, that's just a helpful, I think, illustration. One of the things I wanted to talk about is this idea of community input and community control. And something that really stuck out to me about Karen's report is that this initiative in its like early incubation really came out of developers who were involved in the neighborhood and had holdings here. And they were thinking, we'll kind of like put this model together, we'll seed it, and then we'll involve and invite the community to help us kind of shape it and figure it out. And one of the early learnings, I think, from this process was that couldn't wait. That community control and community input needed to be accelerated and integrated from day one. So I want to ask you first, Adriana, to speak a little bit about how that shift and how that community control plays out. And then I want to turn back to Ms. Darlene to ask her, from her involvement's perspective, how community input really works on an insider level.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So what I would say is we had 4 institutions to help to form and found us. One was a local CDC, one was a small business incubator and accelerator focused on Black and brown businesses. One was a private developer with a B Corp designation, and the other was the city's public-private partnership for economic development. And we were so fortunate in having these folks who were willing to lend their social capital and their networks and their expertise to this work. And we're also able to see that they were not representative of the neighborhood, right? They were not the right folks to be making the decisions about where we were going to acquire, what we were going to acquire, how we would redevelop it, what collective benefit would look like or feel like for the folks here on the ground. And so we did a year-long transition process in which we worked to preserve some of that institutional history around the design and the research and the intent, and mixed it with new residents and small business owners coming onto the governance structure to really inform the way that we move forward. And so after that year-long process, and since then, we've been fully governed by the neighborhood. So in order to be a part of one of the 2 governing bodies of the Kensington Corridor Trust, you must live in or have a small business in the 19134 zip code.
And so, Ms. Darlene, you're involved with this as being part of the board and being connected to the governance of this institution. So can you talk about what it's like to be in those meetings and like, what does community control look like? I mean, one of the things that stuck out for me in the report is that it sounds like if community representatives who are governing the KCT don't want a business to come in, they have that veto power, which is so rare. So can you just talk about your experience navigating that community control?
So that's exactly right. We do have veto power, but fortunately enough for us, we haven't really had to use it because Adriana knows the kind of businesses we want to see in the corridor, and that's who she mainly brings to us. We did have a problem with one business where I was the one holdout, but I did what was best for the community. The businesses that come here are to enhance the community as a whole. We don't want businesses here that is extractive of capital because that's not benefiting the community. A grocery store is a wonderful idea for the corridor because we are in such a food desert. Yes, we do have Aramingo Avenue, but those dollars are not kept for us. Like they're not regenerated in our community. So, and also it's the housing aspect of it. You know, a lot of them are mixed use, commercial and residential. And Adriana always makes sure she prices the residential areas at an affordable rate. You know, and that's very important here because we all know that rents are through the roof. And Adriana always makes sure that the tenants are cared for and taken care of in all the properties. So that's very important also, you know, to know that the tenants that you have in your property is being cared for as a whole, you know, not just as someone who lives in the space, you know. So I'm just grateful that the community is being heard because, like, as I said, so many people come here and say, I know what Kensington needs, but don't really know what we need and don't really care. You know, they're here to extract capital. So KCT as a business model is very, very important because it can be used as a catalyst for other structures such as this to show that you can come into a community, you can listen to the residents of that community, and you can make a difference in that community just by listening to the residents. So I think it's really important that we have say of what comes here and what doesn't.
Thank you, Ms. Darlene. Now, you know, what I'm hearing about KCT and this community power initiative, we're saying a lot of things that sound so powerful and almost too good to be true. But we know that the struggle and the work to make this thing happen is ongoing and that it's a growing project and that it takes a lot of bright and dedicated people to address problems that across the country we're facing and are not being solved and are not being, and to your point, Ms. Darlene, people don't care. People are sort of like allowing business as usual to run our cities and our neighborhoods. So I want to make sure our listeners really understand how KCT works and what its evolution has been through this project. So I guess my question is first for Karen, can you explain what a perpetual purpose trust means? And then for you and for Adriana, how has KCT raised funds, acquired properties? Let's get into the nitty-gritty and mechanics of how this has grown from an idea into a legal structure and an ongoing business concern.
Okay, let me take a couple minutes to explain what a perpetual purpose trust is because, and when I'm saying this, I want all of you to picture Adriana or some of her staff going out to the neighborhood and saying, would you like a perpetual purpose trust in your neighborhood? Right? It doesn't, right? It's not something people are familiar with and it's not that common. So a perpetual purpose trust is a fund that lasts forever, dedicated to a specific mission. So when we think of trust, we think of a parent maybe leaving money, assets for their child before they reach the age of 18, right? It's a short term. It's for that individual, for that child. And when we think of the trustees who are managing those assets, we think of bankers, lawyers, right? So this is a little different. So first of all, it's perpetual, so it's supposed to last forever. That means that it's a way to keep something important going on for decades in a community where residents move in and out. It has a purpose. It has a very express mission. And Ms. Darlene and the other trustees are there to make sure that no one moves away from that mission, no matter how much they want to. And the trust is designed so that in the report, we spent a lot of time saying this isn't a business improvement district, right? Because in a business improvement district, the community isn't involved, right? It's fees to go to support neighborhood infrastructure and streetscaping and mundane things. And it's not a CDC, because if it's a community development corporation, they could choose to sell these assets tomorrow. They could dissolve it tomorrow. And this is a forever thing. And it's probably closest to a community land trust, but it's different there too. So what really struck me was we're trying to create this very different ownership and governance model that will still be around 60 years from now. And hopefully still serving the needs of the neighborhood. But that's just the governance, that's not the financing. So Adriana, let me turn it over to you to talk about that part.
Absolutely. Thanks, Karen. So we look at our capital stack as kind of two primary sides. The first is dollars that don't need to be recovered. So when we're thinking about traditional grants and subsidy, those dollars we are typically sourcing from foundations in and around Philly, but also at the national footprint, right? Folks who are interested in collective ownership or alternative ownership, folks who are interested in small business development and small business attraction. Those folks are really ensuring that we have the capital to do the work. Then we have the other side of the house, as we say, right? And those dollars are typically debt dollars that are coming from foundations in the form of mission-aligned investments, program-aligned investments. And those dollars are coming to us in a way that gives us the spaciousness to be able to do the work on the real estate side. So those dollars are typically on 10 to 15-year terms, interest rates between 0 and 2%. Oftentimes on the front end of those debts, we have interest only deferred and interest only periods, which give us runway to be able to do the acquisition, redevelop the asset, and put it back online, right? Generating revenue, collecting rent, before we move into the full principal and interest repayment period, so the P&I period. And the blend of these two types of dollars are what have allowed us to preserve affordability. So traditional folks who are doing affordable housing oftentimes are reliant or dependent on government funding. While that could be a part of our mix in the long term, it hasn't been in the short term. And I will say the primary reasons for that are the pace and scale of the market, right? If we waited to bring online projects using solely government funding, probably only 1 or 2 of our projects would be online, maybe not even 1 or 2. This is me being generous. What the program-related investments or the mission-aligned investments allow us to do is to move quickly and nimbly, right? We can see a property come up for sale on traditional market, right, on the multiple listing service MLS from a realtor, and we can do a 15-day close because we have those dollars on hand from the foundation. I don't have to wait to apply for acquisition dollars. Once the property is acquired, if it's empty, I can immediately start gutting, right? And we can get going on the rehab and redevelopment. And so it really allows us to not only be competitive in the market with private developers and speculators, but also to ensure that we're not just holding onto properties, right? The Kensington Corridor Trust was not built to just be this holding entity of a bunch of empty buildings. It was really intended to take on the acquisition, redevelop the asset, and then get the gates rolled up, right? Let's get folks into these spaces and activate these spaces in a way that's beneficial to the larger and broader neighborhood. So that's been our funding, kind of just like two sides of the house: grants and subsidy, mission-aligned investments, and program-related investments.
One of the things that I wonder is, how do you preserve affordability for tenants, both commercial and residential, in these properties? I mean, we hear from the affordable housing kind of marketplace and from traditional developers who are being urged to include affordability in mixed use developments and mixed income developments, that affordability is really hard, that subsidy is inadequate, that the cost of construction is high, a million different reasons and excuses why affordability can't be preserved. So I wonder how you are all affording to and allowing for affordability in rents, and if that's something that, I don't want to say is that sustainable, but how does that fit into the model? And do you have any concerns about being able to continue to operate with that as a core value when growing the capital stacks and getting more investment? How do you kind of frame that?
That's an excellent question, Andrew. So really for us, that was one of the pivotal questions early on, is like, how sustainable is it to almost fully rely on program-related investments and mission-aligned investments to come from foundations in order to do all sides of the work, right? The acquisition, the redevelopment, and the reactivation. And in looking at our financial modeling, as long as we're able to maintain the interest rates at 2% or below, we can do naturally occurring, what folks will call naturally occurring affordable units. But we, from a governance standpoint, have been locked at 60% of AMI. So we don't put units online at higher than 60% of AMI. That's our highest. And currently our lowest units are at 30% of AMI. And because we are able to blend interest rates from 0, 1, and 2 all together, it allows us to be able to offer those lower rents. And on the commercial side, we're about 25% below market. And we do that market comparison every 2 years. So we take a look and see, what are other landlords on Kensington Avenue charging? And these are predominantly private developers, but there's also some individual landlords, you know, and if the space right next door to me is of the same quality as ours, right, in terms of fit out and support, and that's $1,000 a month, and we're $750 a month. That's the hard comparison that's done, right? And the last thing I'll just add in terms of like a sustainability standpoint, the thing that makes this model possible to be sustained across time is that the properties are gaining value across time, right? So traditional market is still happening. We're not stopping the market because we're decommodifying real estate. We're very much still a part of the active market that exists here. And so as the property values rise, we'll be able to recapture some of that equity, right, that is built across time to be able to pay the original debtors. And it is a long game strategy, right? This is not a short-term flip and sell. There's no exit here. This is about perpetual holding. And so because we are looking at that perpetual timeline, and because we've had the ability to attract the patient capital, it really has given us the ability to be able to do it and to execute in a way that we can sustain.
I'm going to ask the annoying capitalist question that I always get asked about my own work, which is, how does it scale? You know, you're relying on program-related investments and philanthropic dollars that are at a low rate of return or no rate of return, and you're targeting right now a small stretch of Kensington Avenue. Is this something that you think about, and Ms. Darlene too, you know, expanding the footprint, acquiring more properties, bringing in more investments, like future casting a little bit? And you're also free to say that scale isn't what it's all about, because, you know, that's a question that I think we grapple with in this work. So please, either of you or Karen, I'm just curious how you think about, you know, deepening the impact and broadening.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in, and I would love to hear from Ms. Darlene and then Karen, kind of as an observer to our work, Karen's perspective. But for us, scaling and replication were built into the model, right? That was baked in the day that the trust was formed. Scaling for us means really meeting the full expanse of the corridor, which we see as a 1.4 mile long corridor. We're currently only acquiring on 3 blocks. And so on that 1.4 miles, there's over 600 assets. Right now, we're only targeting less than 200 of them, of which we own 23, right? So it's still very small fish in terms of the larger pond that exists. But we've made really steady headway in terms of keeping up and maintaining the pace of capital, keeping up and maintaining the pace of reactivation, and then business attraction and resident move-ins. The other thing that I'll just note on the replication side is we've been really intentional to evergreen our learnings, right? And this case study, the city case, is a part of that, is to really be intentional about saying, like, here are the challenges, here are the ways in which we've done really great, here are the ways in which we've kind of pivoted and altered the original plan and strategy, right? Like around governance. There are lots of different elements and ways in which we've realized things as we've learned and as we've grown. But on our website, we maintain an active document center where we are sharing our learnings publicly, and folks are invited and welcome to use those resources, because we've spent tens of thousands of dollars of money that we've brought in from foundations to do the legal research, to determine that we could create this strategy, to do the financial modeling, to determine what best governance would look like, to really ensure perpetual ownership and protection of the real estate. And those are large barriers, right? For another neighborhood that maybe wanted to pick this up, not every community and every neighborhood is going to have access to that type of capital just for inception, let alone execution. And so I would just invite and encourage folks to take a look at that document center if they are interested in replication, because it is there with that intention for folks to learn from our work and the ways in which we've shown up and we've been challenged by and have been successful in this work.
So I would love for KCT to expand everywhere because the model is great, you know, but unfortunately we do have limits. So I would like for us to be able to acquire housing, you know, just a building, renovate for housing, but that's not in our wheelhouse. Everything has to be mixed use or commercial use. Our corridor has been disinvested in for many, many years. I mean, many, many years. So acquisition is kind of hard at times because a lot of people think their property is worth more than it really is. So that's challenging. But to be concentrated on these 3 blocks right now is something that we need to do because we need to get it right before we start expanding. So I think to keep it small right now while we're still in our infancy is the right thing to do, because you don't want to acquire too much too soon and then fail at everything. So I think keeping it where it is right now is a good thing until we get our footing and make sure we have the resources to expand that is going to be sustainable.
And I'll just chime in 2 points, which is that when we had that brainstorming session, even before Adriana was brought on board, the hope was that social impact investors, investors who care about what happened to communities, who have private dollars, would be putting their money into this, and they wouldn't get a double-digit return. They would say, I'm not looking for 18% back. I'll take 2% back because I'm doing something really good here. And in fact, the folks who have stepped up are philanthropy. And out of all the foundations in this country, only 2% actually offer program-related investments, PRIs, that are just a vital source. And what Adriana's been talking about, those dollars that they're investing not as a grant, they're expecting something back, but it's cheap money that allows you to do a lot more and offer more affordability. And so if KCT is going to scale, then it needs a few more types of investors to step up and say, I'm not trying to maximize profit to take back home to me. I'm actually trying to benefit the communities in which I work. And I'm hoping that that happens.
Well, and I hope that this case study and the visibility of the publications that you all are developing for your website and this webinar and other outreach opportunities spread the word that KCT is looking to broaden its base of support and the varieties of support to sustain and scale this model for people both in the public sector, the private sector, and the philanthropic sector that really care about turning a neighborhood like Kensington into what it dreams to be, which is for the good of all of us and not just, it's especially good for people who've held that neighborhood up for decades, but like our whole region, our whole city depends on the success of places like Kensington. I wanted to ask, we got a good question in the Q&A. The question was like, what kinds of community businesses, besides the grocery store, are people wanting to see on the corridor? And I wonder for Ms. Darlene, like, is this something where the committee keeps a list or the board keeps a list of like a wish list, or is it more opportunistic when people approach you? How do you kind of decide what the wants and needs are for the corridor?
Well, being as though I lived here for so long, when I first moved down here, Kensington Avenue was beautiful. Like I can do Christmas shopping up there. I can do all my shopping up there. That's what I want to see personally. Again, a place where I can walk a few blocks and get all my shopping done. So that's my wish list to go back to what it was 28 years ago. Adriana presents us with the people who are looking to rent the commercial spaces. And then we vote on whether it will be a good fit or not. Now, some businesses, I'm sure Adriana don't even entertain because they're coming here to extract capital. So it doesn't even trickle down to us because she already knows what we want to see. Like we just want to see a revitalization of a commercial corridor where we can go shopping that is safe, that we can even spend time with our family, up there, going to the garden, feeling safe, just doing normal everyday things that people enjoy from their commercial corridors throughout the city. So I would like to see personally an area where I can go shopping, like groceries, clothes, household items, anything I need. I would love to once again be along this corridor. So that's my wish list. And as I stated, it's not going to be an easy task because KCT is just a drop in the bucket compared to the people who come here with capital to extract capital. So it's very, very hard. But I just want to see a commercial corridor that's safe, vibrant, and thriving with people once again.
So it's that neighborhood serving retail that really meets the needs of the community, as opposed to maybe more of the destination tourist attraction that we have in some commercial corridors in Philadelphia, where people come from all over and that's not necessarily you have to have one or the other, but that you want to have your daily and weekly needs met by the retail that serves this community.
Absolutely. And if it becomes a tourist attraction because let's say we got a great restaurant here that everybody wants to come to, or we have a great store that people heard the word and they want to come shopping, that's great. But for right now, I just want the residents that live here, that struggle here, to be able to shop on their commercial corridor safely, efficiently, and with a bunch of different resources up there to choose from.
Well, that leads to another fantastic question that we got from the audience. And just to say, Hazel just put the link to the KCT report back into the chat if you missed it the first time around, if you weren't in the meeting yet. And some people are asking, where can I learn in depth about the model? And I refer you to that case study because it has very detailed information that is more than we can go into today, more technical, more in depth, and it's a really compelling read. So everybody should be reading that case study who is interested and excited about this model. But the question that we got from the audience, which I would like to address to Adriana and Ms. Darlene, is it seems like an organization that values equity, like you do, faces a conundrum when faced with a large density of unhoused and addicted people in your district. How do you ensure consumer traffic comfort while maintaining an equitable and dignified approach to unhoused and addicted people? And I know that's not the mission of KCT, but I wonder if you have discussions about, people coming to the corridor, wanting to shop. I mean, there's been articles in the paper today and yesterday about how as the encampments have been moved, people are moving in different ways along the corridor and the challenges that that presents to even parts of the neighborhood that weren't directly facing that earlier. So I know it's a dynamic and shifting situation. I wonder if you all do have conversations about how to be a player and a supporter in the neighborhood as the neighborhood deals with persistent challenges.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to the person who posed the question. This is an important question that comes up often, right? Housed and unhoused neighbors, dignity, humanity, seeing people as a people-centered organization, which is critical to us, and equity at the root of that is one of our core values. The thing that I think is worth noting is that, as I noted earlier, we're part of a much larger ecosystem. And so we're so fortunate to have so many partners on the ground here who are doing the day in, day out work of working with the unhoused folks. But from our perspective, the thing that really needs to happen is systems change. We need to work on policy. And so as an organization, we advocate for housing first policy. And it's a dead fast for us, right? There is proven data that if you move folks into housing, you can work on the intersections of their issues. And it is so much more successful when they are housed first than to try to continue to have touch points with folks who are actively experiencing harm and violence and substance abuse, right? Like it is a centricity of issues, right? And we try to kind of tease them out as if they are all their own, but they are not. These are systems. These are systems that have policy that is deeply rooted in the way that we respond, in the way that we as a society respond. And so our organization, I would say, is kind of twofold. One is we are a human-centered, people-centered organization. And so when there is someone who is unhoused, let's say at our garden, right? For folks who are familiar with our work, we had an encampment at our garden for over a year. That we did not actively work to relocate. We worked actively with social workers to get folks housed. And so being really, really centered and rooted in the fact that these folks are here, these folks need supports and services, and these folks are people first. On the other side is there is a systems approach, and there is a policy change, and there's a policy agenda that could be enforced and that could be enacted with dollars, with city support. And so continuing to, show up when those conversations are happening, having those conversations with our councilmatic representatives, and really ensuring that we're not the only voice that's out there saying this, right? Like it is really part of coalition, it is part of community, but it is an ongoing challenge, right? It is a very present challenge, right? So I don't want to dismiss that. It is a very present challenge to be on Kensington Avenue and have a small business or try to get off the L or walk your child to school. These are all challenges that the folks like Ms. Darlene who live here every day don't get to skirt around, right? They don't get to choose to opt out, right? It is their lived experience day in and day out. And so it is a complex issue. For that, again, just as KCT is not a silver bullet, there is no silver bullet solution for this, but there's some really, really good data that says that if we house folks first, we really can support both our housed and unhoused neighbors. And so that is the route in which KCT, I think, has been most effective, is in trying to be in systems and at tables of policy change.
And Ms. Darlene is someone who's lived here for, I think you said, 28 years.
Yes.
What's your thought about that question? I think Adriana gave a very
So-
practical and compassionate answer, but I mean, you have that perspective of the person walking to shop to try to want to do their weekly and daily shopping. How have you thought about this as part of your work?
So I'm going to speak as a resident, not as a KCT board or 501c3 member. I would just like to say that what has been done to my neighborhood is outrageous. Like, this neighborhood has for many, many years been a containment facility for the city's ills and addictive population. This situation could have been nipped in the bud when it was starting, but people in power or that were charged with running the city turned a blind eye because they'd rather have it in our neighborhood than in theirs. Yes, they have been moved off of Kensington Avenue, and we are experiencing some of them moving into the community. But my feeling about it is, yes, they do need housing. I will not negate that fact at all, but they need treatment because I feel like it's no sense in putting someone who is addicted to a substance in a house that they're not going to pay the rent on because their addiction is stronger than their will to pay their rent and their bills, period. I just want my community back. I am so tired of living like this. It's not fair to the adults, children, and everybody in between. It's not fair to the unhoused people here to live on the street, to have people around that is there to sell them drugs that is killing them on a daily basis. It's not fair to them. They do deserve to be treated better. And because our city is charged with doing that, then they should get on the ball to do so. We've lost a lot of good businesses on the corridor because of the population that we have up there. But what do you do with the people who are not ready for treatment, but you still want your neighborhood back? So it's very, it's a delicate situation, but I know the status quo can no longer be the status quo, and something desperately needs to be done.
Well, I appreciate that, Ms. Darlene. And, what I think this speaks to is the interconnected nature of systems and how housing and jobs and income and businesses and education and prison reform and all of these systems have to be in dialogue with each other, and that you can't just try to do a fix over here and expect that it's going to fix everything else. There has to be a comprehensive system-wide approach to thinking about how we rescue and support our neediest, and then all of our families and communities that are part of the fabric of all of that. And so, I guess what I like about KCT is that it knows what its mission is, and it's trying to attack one aspect of this through the stabilization and anti-displacement of commercial businesses and residents that can begin to rebuild the economic base and the community fabric of Kensington. And I think it's one part of a much broader effort that's needed. And I think that the focus is wonderful. And the fact that, as Adriana was saying, you're at the table with other advocates to make sure that when the related issues come up, you're there as one voice among many community partners. We're running out of time. I feel like we need another hour at least for this conversation, but I've got two more questions from the audience that I want to try to do quickly, and then we'll wrap. So the first one is, looking forward, what do you want to be true in year 7 that isn't true today? What are you looking forward to and hoping for KCT?
I'll tackle, but I would love to hear from Miss Darlene on this one too. I think a thing that isn't true today that we would like to see in 7 years, I mean, KCT has moved off of its 3 blocks, right? We've been able to hold sufficient stewardship on those 3 blocks that we move outward towards our larger corridor boundaries. I think our capacity has increased to do this work, to support the small businesses that are coming to the corridor, to do the policy advocacy and systems change that is so critical. And then the last is proving sustainability, proving that this is a financially sustainable, viable, replicable model, because that's what we've been working towards this whole time. And that's what made this city case so important. And we're really excited to see what the next 3 years hold, right? We have a vision and a future and an imagination for what we're building, but it's not history until it's done. So we're excited to see that.
What I would like to see in year 7 is, quite frankly, more businesses, more businesses that is not here to extract capital, but is here to improve quality of life in this community. I would like to see Adriana not be so stressed out in year 7. I would love to see that, but my main thing I would like to see is more businesses thriving on the corridor, more Black and brown businesses on that corridor able to thrive once again.
Thank you so much for that. And my wishes are consistent with yours. More and more without more stress and more strain. We need more capacity to kind of extend this work. And I hope that you'll be able to attract the level of investment and support to build on the amazing work you're already doing. The last question is for Karen. Somebody asked, is Drexel or another university doing work on commercial corridor revitalization and how commercial corridors and cities kind of thrive in the era of online shopping and post-pandemic? And I know that is some of the work that you guys are doing. So can you point us to a resource to learn about some of the national and place-specific work that you guys are doing with the Nowak Lab?
So if you go to the Nowak Lab site, you'll see some work on 52nd Street corridor. Clearly this is work on the Kensington corridor. We're looking at other places. There's a lot of research showing what's been happening, which is basically you need to attract new residents, wealthier residents, and then revitalize a corridor by providing the amenities that serve them. Some nice axe throwing shops or something. And so in both 52nd Street and Kensington Ave, residents are determined that they want to restore the viability of the corridor with businesses that are serving the existing residents and neighbors. And so we are watching with the rest of the country to see if it's possible. So there's some good research, there's some good case studies, but quite frankly, we don't have many examples yet where this has worked, which is what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, and this is ongoing work, like we're in an era of transition in our economy and our society, and we need to pay close attention to the vanguard efforts of organizations like KCT that are trying to prove that another way is possible. And so from that, I want to just thank Ms. Darlene Burton, Adriana Abizadeh, and Karen Black for sharing your stories and experience and your important work this afternoon. You can learn more about systems thinking, about complex problem solving through looking at the Drexel Urban Strategy Program, and Hazel will drop a link to our website. It is a 2-year master's program where we deal exactly with these kinds of questions. And I'd love for you to email me and reach out to me if you're interested in a course of study that really tackles these issues and explores them in depth. Urban Strategy in the Present Tense is produced by the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University in partnership with the Urban Strategy Master's Program in the Westfall College of Media Arts and Design. I am your host, Andrew Zitzer. Special thanks to our producer, Thomas Devaney, and our production director, Hazel DeKito, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Many more of these conversations I hope to come. Thank you all so much.